I'm going to open up.
All right.
And I'm going to share my screen. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our quarantine virtual science cafe. There we go. Just give me a moment. I have trouble seeing things at the same time. So we want to welcome you to our last cafe in our quarantine series, but it's not our last science cafe because we're starting a whole new series this summer, which I'll tell you about in a moment. So as you come on in, if you can open up your chat box and introduce yourselves, we'd love to know who you are, where you're from. Just makes this a more welcoming space for everyone. So thank you for those who have started to introduce yourselves. That's great. I also want to say if you need our live streaming captioning service today, I am entering that information into the chat box right now. So you can just click on the link and that will give you the closed captioning provided today. So keep introducing yourselves. I see we have folks from all over the place, which is so exciting to see. While we are still getting ourselves set up, I want to go over our protocols for when we hang out here in Zoom land. All of you are muted today. And that is just how we set up these webinars, but you do have the ability to share your thoughts and your questions two different ways. We use our chat box for your thoughts or answering a question that our presenters might have. The chat box is really meant to stay on topic. It's not for side chatter. It's not to be chit-chatting on a completely different topic. It's used to just help with the engagement as a way to talk with one another on today's topic. Specifically, if you have questions for our presenters, that's when you're going to use the Q&A box. So if you hover your mouse towards the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there is a specific Q&A box. That's where your questions go. And I know our presenters will be taking questions throughout the presentation, but then they probably will be holding a lot towards the end of the presentation. So don't worry, if you have a question, we do make sure that everything gets answered before we leave today. So we just ask that you be courteous and respectful to one another. Make sure you don't create any distractions. And really in this instance, because you can see us, but we can't see you. Nobody's video's on except for myself and the presenters. So it's really the chat box that can end up being a distraction. So again, just make sure to use it appropriately. Stay engaged, participate fully. I know today's going to be a really good cafe. So before we move on, I do just want to mention, so this is the last cafe in our quarantine series, but we're starting a whole new series called Summer of Science. So there's no cafe next week. We're going to start back up on Wednesday, June 24th at a new time. So we did a survey of participants that have been coming to the cafes, and it seemed like people would still like the afternoon, but maybe just a little bit earlier. So this is based on your feedback that we're gonna be doing it from 1 to 2 o'clock. So you can see the list. It's a really good lineup, and we're kicking off on the 24th on a COVID topic. We have a professor from UVM who's been doing research as part of a team using supercomputers. And it sounds like the research they have been doing is really fascinating. So I encourage you all to learn more about these cafes. You can read a cafe flyer for each on the website that's listed below and register. We also have a Natural Resource Management Academy that's going to be a full week meeting from 1 to 2:30 each day. And we have presenters coming in really just focusing specifically on natural resource management. And so again, you can learn more, look at the flyer more closely online. We encourage you guys to participate. Both series should be really, really good. So with that, I now want to introduce our presenters. So today's topic is your brain's nightlife, the neuroscience of sleep. And I can't see the last word. Isabel, what the neuroscience of sleep and what?
Dreams.
Thank you. It would help if I could see the slide. So I want to introduce our presenters today. I'm most excited for Isabel to be joining us, not to discredit you, Dr. Jebbett, or Professor.
No offense taken.
Had this big conversation, but Isabel was a founding member of our in-person teen science cafes. For the in-person, we have a teen leadership team, and 3 years ago, when we first started putting these together, Isabel was one of the founding teen leaders and was part of the program for 2 years before she left us to go to UVM. So I want to read her bio first. Isabel Petrucci just completed her freshman year at UVM and is a former teen leader of the Vermont Teen 4-H Science Pathways Cafes. While she's not majoring in neuroscience, she has always been fascinated with neuroscience, and her passion grew after she participated in the Vermont Brain Bee while a student at Essex High School. And some of you may have joined us yesterday at our quarantine time session, which was all about the Vermont Brain Bee. And if you missed it, I would encourage you to watch the recording, because the Brain Bee is a really cool way while in high school to get into the field of neuroscience. So now I want to introduce Professor Nathan Jebbett. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Neurological Sciences at UVM's Robert Larner College of Medicine, where he teaches classes in gross anatomy, neuroanatomy, and regenerative medicine to a diverse population of students in the health sciences. He earned his undergraduate degree in cellular, neuroscience, and biology at Colgate University in 2006, and his doctorate at UVM in 2013 for his work researching neural stem cells as models for studying neurotoxicity. Having taught more neuroscience courses in 5 years than any previous instructor, he is a passionate educator that considers himself a jack of all neuroscience-related trades. So with that, I would like to turn today over to Nathan and Isabel. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you, Lauren. I think Isabel's going to get us started here. We're really happy to be here today. I'm going to start up our presentation, and so I'm going to screen share, and Isabel is going to take it from here.
All right, well, thank you again for that introduction, Lauren, and thank you for having us here today. I also just wanted to quickly say thanks to Lisa Bernardin and the UVM Extension for inviting us today. So, as Lauren said, I'm Isabel Petrucci, and I just finished my first year at UVM. And Professor Jebbett and I are really excited to be presenting our talk to you today. And see, we chose our title because it reflects an important change in our understanding of sleep, the fact that it's an active process. Initially, we always thought that it wasn't a very active process because the body isn't doing much during sleep, so we assumed the brain wasn't. This is completely inaccurate, and in fact, we found out that the brain actually does a lot during sleep. So with that, I'm going to get started off, and I'll have Professor Jebbett introduce himself a little more.
Hi, everybody. I'm Professor Nathan Jebbett here at UVM right now. You can see my office in the background. I couldn't swing it around to show all the books and look like a official professor, but I started out as a graduate student here at UVM in 2007, and I just wanted to kind of say a little bit about my pathway here because my job's a little bit unique. So you go to graduate school to get a master's degree or a graduate degree, and you kind of live a little miniature research scientist life. Most of the time, you'll be conducting experiments, writing maybe papers or grants for your the lab you're working for. Maybe you even get to go out and present your research. Most of the time you are reading. So if you want to be a research scientist, if you like those things, if you like solving puzzles, that's what you would do in graduate school. But after graduate school, I realized that I like teaching a lot. So I'm an educator scientist now. I don't have any research that I'm currently performing, but I'm into designing different classes for the curriculum here at UVM. And a lot of the time I'm learning new information about those courses. So it's kind of great because I can go and learn a lot about sleep and I can learn about a lot of things outside of my expertise, which I love doing, and learning new skills like how to do Zoom conferencing. So it's really a great career, and if you like communicating science, which is so important, there are ways you can make a career out of that for yourself. And one of the cool things I get to do is help host the Vermont Brain Bee, which you learned all about yesterday. If you didn't go watch that recording, we'll just briefly mention here that we host the Vermont Brain Bee every year in about February, and it is wonderful. We usually have about 60 students coming here to do a one-day super neuroscience quiz, and they can actually go and see live brain specimens, talk to other students who are interested in neuroscience, so it's really great. And we are fortunate, of course, to have Isabel here. Isabel going to quickly introduce herself and mention the Brain Bee before we get started.
So my junior and senior year of high school, I participated in the Vermont Brain Bee, and I got second place both years. And the Vermont Brain Bee, it's what really got me fascinated into neuroscience, that and the neuroscience club we had at my high school, and it really started me on this path to learn more about neuroscience. So while I'm actually a chemistry major, I'm planning on taking a lot more classes at UVM on neuroscience, some of the classes that Professor Jebbett mentioned. And recently, I've learned a lot about sleep. And in fact, I'm not the only one who's been interested in sleep. People have wondered about sleep for a very long time, as it's a central component of our lives and of our cultures, and of many cultures. Originally, many philosophies and religions thought of sleep as an intermediate state in between wakefulness and death. Some cultures, like the Greeks, actually thought sleep was generally good for you, while others saw it more as a passive necessity. In medieval times, people used to sleep twice a day. Since there was no artificial light back then, they would go to bed when the sun set, and then around 2 or 3 a.m. they would wake up, do various activities around the house, and then they'd go back to bed again. Many other cultures incorporate a siesta or a nap during the middle of the day. Dreams were also viewed through a supernatural lens, as many cultures actually thought that dreams could connect the dreamer to a spiritual realm, the recently deceased, non-human spirits, or even the divine. Additionally, in many cultures in Africa, dreams are thought to be a message from others in order to provide the dreamer with essential information. So, the renowned psychologist Sigmund Freud published The Interpretation of Dreams in 1900. Although Freud did get some things twisted, he was one of the first to rigorously study dreams and what they meant to the person dreaming. His ideas, that dreams could hold hidden meanings and are gateways to the subconscious, were incorporated into many artistic and creative works of the 20th century. For example, Salvador Dali was inspired by the work of Freud and incorporated surreal dreamlike imagery into his works, like you can see in this picture on the slide. So, as mysterious as sleep is to humans, it's remarkably ubiquitous in the animal kingdom. It's found in all animals with backbones. And as you can see on the slide, some animals do it very little. Horses and elephants will sleep about 2 to 3 hours a night, while an animal like a walrus can go 3.5 days without sleeping. And in animals like this native white-tailed deer actually only sleeps about 4 hours during the day and is mostly active at night. In comparison, some animals sleep quite a lot. So here you can see there's a brown bat that sleeps about 20 hours a day, upside down, while the python, the giant anteater, and the native opossum sleep about 18 hours a day. In fact, sleep is so important to animals that many go through great lengths in order to just get a little bit of sleep. So some species of dolphins, whales, seals, reptiles, and birds can sleep with only half of their brain. For example, in dolphins, they'll sleep with half of their brain while the other half is active and allows them to surface up to the water, to surface the water in order to breathe. While some birds, like these geese in this picture, will sleep with half of their brain while the other half is active and is making sure that there are no predators around. In fact, sleep is so important to bears that they'll actually wake up from hibernation just so that they can go back to sleep. Even insects like the Malay lacewing have periods of reduced activity that look very similar to sleep. So clearly sleep is something that we all need to do. In fact, it's fatal not to sleep. But unlike withholding food and water, you can die from not sleeping because eventually, whether you want to or not, you will fall asleep. Besides the effects of severe pain and the urge to breathe, the urge to sleep is actually one of the strongest drives you can have. Additionally, it appears that sleep is for the brain rather than the body. The body can recover just fine if you lay motionless and rest for a little bit, while the brain doesn't. It requires sleep in order to recover. And if we don't get our 7 to 9 hours of sleep, we'll incur a sleep debt that you'll have to make up for later when you have the chance to. And what's far more mysterious than sleep is dreaming, which takes place about a quarter of the time that we're asleep. So now we have a little survey that we prepared for you guys. So let us know, how many dreams did you have last night? A, 0 dreams, B, 1 dream, C, 2 to 6 dreams, or D, more than 20.
And I'm gonna launch a poll that you can answer right into the poll. If for some reason you don't see the poll, you can write it in the chat, but this way we can see really if there is a majority here. No,
Looks like we got most everybody.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll end the poll. You can see the results.
Okay, so it looks like the majority of you said 2 to 6 dreams. And that's actually correct. In fact, more specifically, most people will have 4 to 5 dreams every night. Professor Jebbett will explain a little bit more why he's so confident in this number. So just a little overview of what we'll talk about today. First, Professor Jebbett will give a quick lesson on how the brain works. That's so that we can tell you about what we believe is happening in the brain during sleep. Then we'll finish up talking about dreams. So as Lauren mentioned before, if you guys have any questions, any clarification type of questions, go ahead and ask it in the chat. But if you have any more curiosity questions, you can save those until the end. We'll have time to answer your questions in more depth. So the first question we really want to look at is, how do we study sleep? We began to study sleep with one of the simplest neuroimaging neurophysiological techniques available, which is the electroencephalogram, also called the EEG. EEGs help us to determine the stages of sleep. It was invented in the 1920s, and essentially, it's a bunch of electrodes that you connect to your scalp. Usually how they do this is they move your hair out of the way, apply a gel, and then stick on an electrode like a suction cup, taping the whole thing down to make sure it's secure, as you can see in the picture. So this is what typical EEG data looks like. It's measuring the voltage as a function of time. So all of the little squiggles that you see are the voltages that are being recorded at all of the electrodes. The time is then plotted on the x-axis. This tells us a little bit more about what the brain does. So here we have another question for you guys. So do you guys think that this EEG is showing someone who's awake, dreaming, or sound asleep?
All right, I'll launch that poll. Oh, is that? No, I don't think I have that. This one's going into the chat.
This one's going into the chat, folks. Guess we can. I don't know if I can close the poll. Oops, maybe I did.
Yeah, just hit X.
Oops, I guess we didn't get that one. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, can we see the chat? I just tried to pop it out. But
Yeah, it looks like a lot of people are saying, well, there were a lot of C's. I did see a couple people say dreaming.
Interesting.
There was a couple other people said, so I haven't seen any A's. It almost seemed equally split between B and C.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah, so it seems like most of you guys think either this is showing an EEG of someone who's dreaming or sound asleep. Well, actually, it's an EEG of someone who's awake. But the thing is, unless you're an expert and you really know how to read an EEG, it can be really difficult to distinguish between an EEG of someone who's awake and of someone who's dreaming, because they can look very similar, and it may be hard to distinguish between them. So there are a lot of different types of EEGs. You can have one with many electrodes, like the picture on the left, or you can even have a portable EEG, like the one on the right, that you can buy yourself in case you wanted to do a sleep study at your home. And like I said before, EEGs use electrical sensors placed on the scalp and in order to detect changes in voltage. But what does this really mean? What is an EEG really measuring? Professor Jebbett will give a quick lesson on neuroscience to explain what's really happening with an EEG.
Thank you so much, Isabel, for that lovely introduction there. I am going to give you guys a quick neuroscience lesson here. So I'm going to give you basically everything you need to know about neuroscience, assuming you know nothing. And to do this, I'm going to have to make a few brash generalizations about brain function. I'm going to have to make some statements that are usually true, but not always true. So this is to give you guys just a crash course, and as you go on and you learn more, you can email me and tell me all the ways that I lied to you here. But let's get started thinking about what the nervous system does. What does the nervous system really do? There's actually an easy answer there. It controls movement. Plants don't have nervous systems. They don't move around. Humans have nervous systems and animals have nervous systems. We move around. And there are actually critters that swim around for half their lives and then become essentially like plants that eat their own brains because they don't need them anymore. So muscles and contracting glands, that's basically the only way any animal can ever hope to influence their environment. And we're going to control muscles and glands with neurons. Neurons are the cells of the nervous system. You can see a very simple neuron here. It's got a cell body where it receives signals in the form of chemicals, and then it transmits an electrochemical signal down its axon to a structure known as a synapse, where chemicals are released to cause that muscle to contract. So these motor neurons are going to help us contract our muscles, but when should we contract our muscles? Just randomly? No. We should contract our muscles when there's some sort of sensory signal there that's telling us there's something in our environment worth contracting a muscle about. So there's other types of neurons called sensory neurons that activate the motor neurons. And here's a sensory neuron right here. I can show you with this laser pointer. We have a cell body again and another axon. So very similar, a little different looking, but we're going to transmit a signal down that axon to the synaptic endings where a chemical is released that triggers this motor neuron. I know it looks super simple here, but I've just described your most simple reflexes in your body. So when the doctor hits your knee with a mallet, this is essentially what they're doing. They're turning on one sensory neuron that goes directly to a motor neuron, causes a muscle to contract. Okay, simple there so far. Let us know if you're not with us or if we confuse you. Isabel will interrupt me if she sees something in the chat there. But there's other types of sensory neurons out there too. It's not only touch, pain, things like vision, hearing. We just have a neuron for those, and we wire those neurons up in a similar way. But the real magic happens, and why we can do things that are more complicated than reflexes is because we have these in-between neurons. I'm going to call them in-between neurons here. Other people might call them different things, but this is why you can do more interesting things than not burning yourself or not blinding yourself or having reflexes, is because of all these in-between neurons. And you can see they come in all different cool shapes and sizes to help you do those sophisticated behaviors, basically just by wiring a bunch of these up together. So that's your quick neuroscience lesson. Now for a quick neuroanatomy lesson. So I don't know how well you can see me, my picture here, because I'm screen sharing right now, but I know you got a little window in the corner. And so I've got a brain here. Here's my nice plastic brain. So you can tell that in this image, we're looking at the brain from the side. Okay, there's a really simple principle in neuroanatomy. Once you know where the front of the brain is, and that's going to be here on the left side of the image, that's where you would have your nose, and the back of the brain on the right side of the image here. Oop, did you interrupt me? Hear somebody?
No, thank you.
Oh, okay. We're good to go. So front of the brain, back of the brain, pretty easy. And those are going to relate to our neurons. In fact, we find the motor neurons, the ones that are controlling muscles, in the front of the brain and the spinal cord, which are together referred to as the central nervous system. And neurons that talk to those motor neurons are also in the front. So there's this really easy neuroanatomical principle that motor's in the front, and as you might guess, sensory is in the back. All of those neurons bringing signals in from the body and from the special sensory organs, they're in the back. And neurons that they talk to are generally in the back. So learning lots of neuroanatomy here. You thought you were just going to find out about sleep today, but a little bonus. So let's talk about these neurons. You can directly connect them together, sure, that's reflexes, but you can also send those signals from the sensory neurons up to higher parts of the nervous system, to those in-between neurons. When those in-between neurons put together what to do, they send a signal back to those other reflex motor neurons, or not reflex, but motor neurons. So you've got different levels of the nervous system. At the lowest level, you kind of have reflexes, and at the highest level, consciousness and all these lovely things that you're doing in your head right now. And the way the brain is set up to do this is a little bit like the dirty laundry hamper I know is in the corner of your room. So on the bottom of that dirty laundry hamper are the oldest parts. And on the bottom of the central nervous system, we have the oldest parts, those parts that govern reflexes and staying alive that every creature has. But the most recently added laundry's on the top, and the most recently added brain regions are on the top. In a very simplified way of thinking about it, you've got, when we split the brain in half, oops, yes, we split the brain in half. We did that. I think I can do it with this one here. So that's what it looks like. We've got on the bottom floor, life support systems and reflexes. As I've said a few times here, usually it's a sensory neuron to a motor neuron, or maybe one in-between neuron in there. Or we can pass the signal up to the higher levels of the nervous system. So the next level up, the next floor above, is the sort of survival level, where we've got structures called the hypothalamus, which I can kind of laser pointer around here, and the rest of the limbic system. These are important for emotion, and emotion is important for survival, getting you to run away from scary things and run towards good things. But at the very top level of the nervous system, where we have more in-between neurons than ever, is where we have consciousness and learning taking place. So consciousness and learning take place in these bumpy structures. The whole bumpy structure itself is called the cerebrum, but the very outer shell of it is called the cortex. And that's where we have lots of these in-between neurons, and that's where your conscious entity that is you is hanging out. You're just a bunch of in-between neurons up there. Sorry to get so philosophical. We'll move on. But at least as a neuroscientist, that is the assumption we make. Okay, cool so far. So at that top level, we still see a dichotomy between the posterior bits, which are going to receive information, and the anterior bits, or the bits in the front, which are going to send information to those motor cells. So the sensory motor thing still works here. Whew. Okay, one more super important structure for understanding sleep, and that is this little unhappy face here. I thought he was happy earlier. There he is. He's happy now. It's the thalamus. The thalamus sits right in the middle of the brain, and it is like the goalie of consciousness. Things have to get by the thalamus to enter your conscious brain. So the thalamus can let things through, or it can block sensory signals from reaching your conscious brain. This is going to be important for sleep because you aren't receiving a lot of those sensory signals. So we're not passing things on, but we could still have reflexes. Okay. So just to point out the thalamus, he's happy. One more time here, we're going to cut the brain. I've got another brain here. You can see my picture. Got another brain. What we're doing is we're kind of pulling it apart like this and looking at it like that. And the whole point, again, was just to show you that happy little thalamus right in the middle. And the thalamus is what is going to be important for EEG. And that's why I'm talking about it here. So let's put the brain back together and talk about how the cortex works when the thalamus lets signals through. The thalamus, or the cortex has 4 different lobes. Maybe you tuned in to another neuroscience talk and they told you about these. The frontal lobe here in the front, the parietal lobe in the back, the occipital lobe in the way back, and then the temporal lobe kind of hanging down here on the side. And how the cortex works in these 4 easy steps is that, again, sensation goes into the back of the cortex. That's when you realize something is touching your hand, or some bright object is in your eyesight, or you're hearing some music or tasting something. So your senses go to areas of the cortex called primary areas, and then you put the picture together. Say, what's going on around me? The second step is saying, how does that make me feel? So those limbic system areas, areas tied to memory, analyze that scene and say, this is what's important here. Let's make a plan about it. So you really attend to those important sensations and you do something with them. They're important because you're hungry and you need to go make a sandwich, or it's way too hot and you need to get up and go and turn down the thermostat. So the frontal lobe, or the very frontal parts called the prefrontal cortex, send the signal to the motor cortex, and that's when you act. 4 simple steps, and now you pretty much know all of neuroscience, because that process is just going to repeat and repeat and repeat many times a second. Okay, saw maybe a hand up. Were there any questions on the chat, Isabel, before I go on?
So there are some questions in the Q&A, but they probably can wait and keep for you to keep going.
All right, so I'm gonna keep going. I tend to talk way too long. I will not stop though. If we get over time, I'll just keep going. It's like a bonus for everybody. So we got to explain EEG. That was the whole point. And what EEG is doing is we're placing those, remember, electrodes on the surface of the scalp, and they're listening to the cortex only. That's the only part of the brain close enough for those to listen to. And what EEG is it's kind of like holding a microphone above a huge stadium of people. The people are the neurons and the microphone's the electrode. And you can kind of figure out what those neurons are just sort of generally doing. Like if you held a microphone above a stadium, you couldn't listen to people's individual conversations, but you could tell if the home team just scored a goal because everybody's cheering, or if the away team scored a goal, everybody's quiet. So you could figure out just kind of the general idea of what's going on. And that's what EEG is doing. It's telling us if all these neurons are doing the same thing, or if they're not doing the same thing. So if they're doing the same thing, they're going to be synchronized, meaning that we're hearing the loud and the quiet parts, and we're seeing these big deflections on the electrode because all the neurons are singing at once, or they're all having individual conversations like you see on the right of this image, and so that chatter just kind of drowns everything out. And how this relates to the brain is that the thalamus, when it stops transmitting sensory signals to the cortex, gives this big synchronized deflections. Whereas you have much littler, tighter squiggles when the cortex is awake and when it's doing all sorts of different things to support consciousness. Okay. So this idea of synchrony versus desynchrony is important for understanding EEG. This is really cool animation because you can see synchrony and desynchrony in a sleeping zebrafish brain. So these are little tiny fish, and you can fill their neurons with a colored dye that gives light when those neurons fire, when they release a signal. So you can see them kind of chattering away, desynchronized, but when that flashes, a bunch of neurons in the cortex are synchronized. And that's what you are seeing here on this EEG. It's a bunch of neurons really desynchronized, all chattering together. This person is awake. So what we call them in the EEG world, we kind of name these squiggles based on the amount of squiggles per second, or the frequency, and the amplitude, how big the squiggles are. When you're just kind of hanging out, resting quietly, you have what's called alpha activity on the EEG. And when you're doing a bunch of stuff and your brain's really alert and actively thinking, you have what are called beta rhythms or beta activity. You can see the squiggles get tighter and the amplitude gets smaller. Okay, so now we know what EEG is measuring. It's measuring activity in the cortex that depends heavily on what the thalamus is letting through. The stages of sleep, remember, they're measured with an electroencephalogram, but we're also hooking up other things here. So you can see electrodes on the side of this woman's head. Those are measuring her eye movements, and there's one on her chin measuring muscle activity. And you can see that we've got a device in her nose and probably on her heart or somewhere to measure her heart rate and respiration rate as well. So we put all this data together and we do sleep studies. So you have to go into a lab to do these things. And you have to sleep through the night hooked up to this stuff. So it takes a little bit of practice, but then we can give you a hypnogram. We can give you an actual chart of how you went through the different stages of a typical night's sleep. And this is what it would look like if you got just kind of the average sleep. So W is for waking. I can kind of point that out here. W is for waking. And then as you go to sleep, you see you descend down through different stages of what's referred to as either not rapid eye movement sleep or slow wave sleep. There's little different names used by different scientists. The idea is that this is different from REM sleep, which I know a lot of you guys probably have heard about before. That's the sleep where we think the most dreams happen. So you can see you don't wake up, but you come into REM sleep after slow wave sleep, and then you kind of dip back down, and you repeat that all throughout the night in about 90-minute cycles. And they get shorter and shorter actually as the night goes on, but you get longer and longer periods of rapid eye movement sleep. Okay, cool. So this is why the EEG is so cool, is because we didn't know anything else about what the brain was doing, but we were able to define these sleep stages, and we still use it today for this reason. So what's keeping us awake, and what makes us go to sleep, and what is the brain doing in all these different sleep stages? Well, first of all, let's point out that you are kept awake by a bunch of neurons in the brainstem. And what these neurons are all collectively referred to as the reticular activating system. I don't really care that you know all the names, but just know that this is essentially the brainstem keeping the cortex awake by keeping it pumped full of neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are the chemicals released for neurons to talk to each other or talk to muscles. And there's a lot of ones you've probably heard about keeping you awake, hopefully right now. Histamine, you might have heard antihistamines make you sleepy. Dopamine, that makes you excited, so you won't go to sleep. Serotonin, changing your mood. Acetylcholine, important for thinking and cognition. Norepinephrine, again, when you get shocked and scared, you don't want to go to sleep. So these are sending connections to keep the cortex functioning, and they're also sending connections to keep the thalamus happy and letting information through so you can become consciously aware of it. So how does this change when you start to go to sleep? Well, two things are going to change the activity of the reticular activating system. There's the amount of sleep you owe, called your sleep debt, because you've been awake for ever how many hours. So sleep debt increases as you're awake, decreases as you sleep. So what is sleep debt to the brain? Well, there is a chemical called adenosine, and some of you might recognize this. Isabel probably recognizes this because she's a chemistry major. But adenosine is part of ATP, the energy molecule for cells, and it's ATP without the TP because it's all out of energy. So literally when the cortex is out of energy, it's sensed somehow by the sleep promoting center. It's like a sleep on button. It's also called the ventrolateral preoptic area of the hypothalamus. And the sleep on center is getting its information. Oops, sorry. The sleep on center can be blocked by caffeine. Point that out right now because it's very important to scientists. And you can see that caffeine has a similar shape to adenosine. So it literally just kind of fits in there and blocks adenosine from having its effect. So that's why coffee works. But it doesn't only take its commands from adenosine, it also takes commands from the circadian rhythms of the body. So the sleep on center turns off all of the reticular activating system, and that is going to cause you to go to sleep. Here is a little doggy, and you can see this little doggy has a condition called narcolepsy, where sleep intrudes on wakefulness. And what the sleep on center does is it turns off an important little wake center that I've highlighted in yellow here. So this actually makes a chemical called orexin, and people who have narcolepsy are going to be lower on orexin. And we discovered this actually by finding the gene in dogs and then looking in people. So dogs actually helped us figure out narcolepsy, and we love dogs. So this sleep off center turns off the sleep on center, and the sleep on center turns off the sleep off center. So when this happens, you go to sleep. Your EEG rhythms go from being very desynchronized to going to be more synchronized. You can see this theta activity emerges in early stages of sleep. In fact, if you're watching somebody and they're sleepy, you'll start to see this theta activity and it will predict them going to sleep. So these little squiggles are highlighted in red. There are some other squiggles below here called sleep spindles and cave complexes. I'll mention those later. Okay, so we're going to sleep. We're in NREM stages 1 and 2. You're nodding off. You might not even be aware you're asleep in this stage. But as the night continues on, you will start to get less and less alert, and your brain will start to get more and more synchronized. So in NREM stages 3 and 4, you start to see delta activity on the EEG, because now the neurons are just kind of doing their own thing up in the cortex. They're all firing together because the thalamus has blocked them from getting information about what else is going on. So slow wave sleep gets the deepest down there early in the night, and now you're out cold. Maybe you're snoring, your muscles have relaxed, the heart rate and breathing go down. You're very difficult to awaken in this stage. So you're pretty much giving the brain a rest. If you do an experiment to see how active the brain is by giving somebody a milkshake that contains radioactive sugar and then looking in their brain a little later to see where that sugar went, that little bit of radioactivity is much higher here in the above image, because you're using much more energy when you're awake, and you can see that it looks much cooler here in the image below, because when you're asleep, you're just not using that much energy, at least when you're in slow wave sleep. But there's a little asterisk next to active, because there is one part of the brain that is more active in even the deepest parts of sleep than it is when it's awake. And that's called the hippocampus. So you might have heard of the hippocampus before. It's important for memory. And the hippocampus becomes so active during NREM sleep, it generates these little EEG waveforms called sleep spindles and K complexes. To understand what the hippocampus is doing, you have to understand a little bit about memory. So in neuroscience and psychology, we separate memory in a lot of different ways, but one way we do it is by breaking it into declarative memory and non-declarative memory. So you can think about when you learn to ride a bicycle, at least I hope that's still a universal enough experience. So if you remember what age you were and what kind of bicycle you had and what street you were on and who you were with, those would be declarative memories. You can write them down. You can write down the story of how you learned to ride a bicycle. What's harder to write down is the actual knowing of how to ride a bicycle, of how to move your center of balance over just to not fall down. You can't put words to it. There's kind of this mental muscle math that you do, and you know how to ride a bicycle, and that's what a non-declarative memory is, a memory of how versus a memory of what. The hippocampus is storing memories in NREM, and it's generally storing the what type memories. You can see in this little animated GIF here, there's a little mouse, and it's walking down a hallway. And what those dots are representing are neurons in its hippocampus. And the hippocampus is keeping track of your place in space, and it's firing different cells in different positions as this mouse walks along the maze. This actually is replayed without the maze there during slow wave sleep. Like the mouse is running the maze in its dreams. So really cool. The thalamus is shut down so that these little, very tiny signals can then be taught back out to the cortex. So the hippocampus, what it's doing is it's teaching the cortex those memories you acquired when you were awake so that you can remember them forever. So the hippocampus is storing those memories in non-REM sleep. And if you ask people, what are you thinking about when you wake them up? If they're thinking about some task they just learned, they'll do better on the task the more they're thinking about it when you wake them up from NREM sleep or slow wave sleep. And this is true only with declarative learning tasks. We'll talk about non-declarative learning tasks in a moment, but it's really good for learning things like the contents of this lecture. Okay, cool. I'll stop here for a second. Isabel, is there anything I should get to again?
I think you're good. Just for these two graphs, it's actually, at least on my screen, it's cut off on the bottom.
I'm gonna assume
describing which one's declarative and which one's non-declarative.
Yeah, so just again, declarative memories are, you can declare it. You can tell about it because it's memories for facts, places in space, your own autobiographical memory of what happened to you versus knowing how to do things. I could forget when I learned to ride a bicycle, but put me on a bicycle and I'll know it. That's a non-declarative memory, knowing how. Okay, gonna keep going here. We'll have more questions at the end because we don't stay in slow wave sleep forever. Eventually, we transition into REM sleep. And as you can see here, again, in this radioactive milkshake image here, which is called a PET scan, for those of you playing along at home, you can see the brain looks a lot more like being awake than it does being in slow wave sleep. And so when you go into rapid eye movement sleep, the EEG all of a sudden goes from synchronous to desynchronous. And it looks a lot more like you're awake than it does you're asleep. And you can see these circles here. Those are electrical signals created by the eyes darting around underneath the eyelid. And rapid eye movement sleep gets its name for that reason. You can see that theta activity and beta activity predominates the EEG signals, and you have these rapid eye movements. So here in REM sleep, your heart rate and breathing increase. So it's like you're waking up. Interestingly, you lose control of your body temperature. You stop being able to like sweat or turn your body temperature up or down. And you're easiest to awaken when you're in REM sleep. If somebody shakes you or even just says your name, usually you'll wake up and you'll feel conscious, and you probably will report dreaming. But there's another physiological feature of REM sleep that will let you identify the REM sleeping cat in this lovely figure here that we put together. So hopefully we got this one. Do we have this one, Lauren?
Yes, I'll relaunch the poll and let's see. Okay, yep. So looks like you just choose which image you think is the cat in REM sleep.
Kitties in REM sleep. You're going to learn how to identify when your cat is in REM sleep after this question too. It'll be great. Let's see. Guys, On the right
It's kind of looking
trail.
like it's almost even getting even with A coming out a little ahead, but
Okay, maybe let's get one more and see if we confuse things or get more of the correct
if
answer.
you haven't voted yet, get your vote in. Well, I think A is gonna be.
All right, you guys are
takes the
so
lead.
you guys are so good today. A is the correct answer, and I'm curious. Put it in the chat why people picked A, and I'll just give away the answer here. The answer is, you can see that kitty is incredibly floppy in A. It is like a wet noodle. In B and D, we're kind of moving around with our large muscles, and you don't stretch with your large muscles when you're in REM sleep. You'll usually do that in slow wave sleep. So, and in slow wave sleep, you have muscle tone. So the kitty in C is definitely in slow wave sleep. So you can see when your kitty is just kind of like flopped out, and know that it is having some kitty dreams because you're atonal. You have zero muscle tone except for your eyes and a little few twitches when you're in REM sleep. Okay.
So, Professor,
Ooh,
would
yep.
you say, what are the rest of the cats doing? Are they in non-REM sleep?
Yep. So I would say that they're in non-REM sleep. You're usually in lighter non-REM sleep, like in B and D, when you're changing position in the night, but not like really waking up. In C, it definitely has to be a non-REM sleep. If you see like a cat sleeping on a branch in REM sleep, they usually just like flop down with their limbs like that. Good question. All right. So try to finish up here. We'll still have like 15 minutes for questions. So let's talk about dreaming here. When people are woken up in REM sleep, about 80% of them or more, 80 to 90%, report dreaming. So that's how these dream studies are done. You just wake people up, and if you do that and you're dreaming, generally you'll remember your dream for a few seconds. So they'll tell the examiner about the dream. So the answer of 4 dreams per night comes from you having about 4 to 5 REM sleeps. You can see there's about 5 here. Most people get little less than 8 hours of sleep. So each one of those REM sleeps has a dream in it. And dreams in REM are story-like dreams. You're the central character in a series of bizarre events. Maybe your teeth are falling out. Maybe you're back in your old high school. Maybe you forgot to go to that class that you signed up for. I can still get that dream. But those are your REM dreams. You're going through an environment, encountering people and objects like a story. Interestingly enough, 50% of the people woken up in not REM sleep or NREM or slow wave sleep report dreaming as well, but those dreams are different. They're more like thoughts or vague emotions and perceptions than really elaborate stories with crazy visuals. And actually nightmares and sleep terrors happen in NREM sleep. So don't think it's not just dreamless, total unconsciousness that's happening there. Okay, so let's sum up where we are and then finish by talking about what the brain is doing when you are dreaming. So when you're awake, remember the reticular activating system is on, keeping you pumped full of neurotransmitters, moving around, getting into trouble, doing what you do. When you're sleeping, the thalamus stops letting things through, the reticular activating system quiets down, the hippocampus starts talking. But when you're dreaming, we're going to turn the lights back on, but we're really going to only turn a few of the lights back on, not all the lights so you're awake. We're going to turn on the acetylcholine light. And acetylcholine neurons in the brainstem are thought of as controlling REM sleep. And how are they doing it? How are they producing dreams? Well, connections to the thalamus, which is kind of in a, like a meh state here, cause internally generated perceptions, meaning that the acetylcholine will be released in the thalamus, and the thalamus will just kind of turn on random stuff, random memories, random fragments, and put all those random fragments together in some new way. So it's going to activate the sensory stuff, but independent of anything going on in the environment. And the limbic system is also activated, super activated, so all the social and emotional content enters your dreams. You can put the brain back together here. So we've got the sensation, but now it's all weird and random, and we've got the feeling, but it's really strong. And in dreams, usually there's some kind of movement aspect. Motor cortex becomes active, actually active in the same ways and the same patterns as when you are awake. So why aren't you moving around? Well, the acetylcholine neurons also block any of those signals from coming down and going to your spinal cord or your brainstem and causing you to move around. With the exception, of course, of your eyes, because those neurons turn off before they hit the roadblock. So the eyes will move around. The eyes are moving around in relation to the dream content, like you're looking around in your dreams as you're doing stuff. So putting it back together here, you can notice one area we didn't turn on when we are dreaming, and that's the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is basically quiet during REM sleep. And this is why dreams are how they are. This is the part that's responsible for planning, responsible for working memory, holding a lot of things in your mind so you can figure out what's going on. And this turns off during dreams. So you lose volition, you lose intentional movement, you lose logic, orientation, working memory, everything gets disorganized. This is a lot like how you'd behave if you actually had a frontal lobe injury that was severe in real life. Stop having long-term goals or long-term purposes, and you kind of just are carried along by events. Maybe some of you are asking, because I saw some chats, about lucid dreaming, because that is different. Lucid dreaming, if you don't know, is when you become aware that you're in the dream, and maybe even you get to take control of yourself in the dream and do whatever you want. I'm curious, have you ever had a lucid dream before? So we got the last one here. I think, Lauren, let's see how our students are lucid dreaming.
The poll has been launched.
The poll has been launched. Well, the poll is registering. I'm going to back up here and I'm going to show you in the lucid dreaming image here. You can see a part of the brain that's different. Oops, I'm circling it with my mouse. I need to use a laser pointer. You can see a part of the brain that is different. And in lucid dreams, your frontal cortex actually does activate. You get that planning back and you are all of a sudden able to act in your dream. So it's that frontal lobe coming back on almost by accident during a dream. I see we've got 45% of people have had a lucid dream. That's really cool. Actually, the number I had was 55% of people have experienced at least one in their lifetime. So you guys doing great because you're all young, plenty more time to lucid dream. If you haven't, we can talk about ways you can at the end here. Maybe if you're not sure, you know, maybe you forgot, keep paying attention to your dreams. All right, so we're almost towards the end. I want to point out essentially the function of non-REM sleep related to memory, REM sleep related to memory. And that is the sort of opposite. In non-REM sleep, we're consolidating declarative memories. Here in REM sleep, we're consolidating non-declarative memories, or we're making non-declarative memories. We're getting better at how to do things. And you can see in this image here, this is an image of another MRI scan, or I think this could be a PET scan, showing that there's more activity here in these red regions, which are related to this non-declarative memory function. So you're getting better doing those things that you're doing in your dream. I had like an awesome lucid dream one time where I was like the best snowboarder and I could like do all the tricks. And it gave me a little more confidence the next time I went to the hills. So here's another evidence kind of from a study showing non-declarative memories are strengthened in REM. What they taught people to do in this study was to trace a drawing while they're looking in a mirror. This is really hard to do. I can never figure out which side to push my hair to while I'm looking in the Zoom camera, but they can practice this and get really good at looking in a mirror and doing this. This is a skill. So it's strengthened by sleeping. But if you only have slow wave sleep, oops, I clicked that. if you only have slow wave sleep, it doesn't get nearly as good as when you have REM sleep as well. And they've done other studies like this where people play video games and you get a lot better at video games if you have that REM sleep. And there's kind of ways they control these studies that are pretty complicated, but we can ask, if you're interested in those, I can talk more about them. Anyways, we are now getting towards the end of the presentation. What I have here is a summary slide from one of the papers that I read to prepare this today, just showing kind of the summary for each one of those. So I'm not going to read it. I'll point out the top here, kind of like when you're awake, you're acquiring information. You go to sleep, that information is replayed to you, it's iterated. And then when you dream, the information is all integrated together and you work on those kind of non-declarative memories. So this is really cool. This technology, EEG, is great for studying sleep because all of these cool animals, many of the ones we talked about, have the same sorts of EEG patterns, meaning you can tell when your mice or your bunnies are dreaming if you've got the right setup here. Okay, so kind of the public service end of this announcement. How can you have better sleep? Well, there are certain behaviors that are helpful for sleep, certain behaviors that are hurtful for sleep. Many you probably already know about. Exercise is good, but you don't want to do it too close to bed because exercise is very alerting and you'll turn on that reticular activating system. Having a daily routine with set times is good. That's good for your circadian rhythm. Alcohol and drugs tend to interfere, especially with REM sleep. Even caffeine after noon can decrease the quality of REM sleep. So you want to treat medical problems, anything that's bothering you or worrying you well before you go to sleep. If you're a worrier like me, make a list of those worries and kind of like leave it outside the bedroom. And focus on the kind of quiet task before bed. And have a good sleep environment. Make it really dark. It should be pretty cold in there as well. If you have to pull covers over you, that's okay. But lights, especially like those blue lights that are on like every phone charger now, or lights on a clock, can be very disruptive to sleep. Okay, so hopefully I gave you some pointers there. You can easily find this on the internet, but it's important if you like sleep, if you like dreaming, if you want to be healthier, if you want to have a better brain, to get good sleep. And with that, we are going to conclude and show you a few of our references here. We can give you complete citations if you want to send me an email. Happy to turn you on to any interesting stuff you're looking to learn about. And right now, we will take questions after a quick announcement from Lauren.
Yep, so we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, so it's great that you all have submitted them. I'm going to launch one final poll. So we always need to get feedback for our presentations today. So we're going to just take a couple of seconds here for you to answer both these questions, and then we're going to go through all the Q&A. So hopefully you can stick around to hear the answers because I've seen the questions. There's some good ones in there.
Oh my gosh, I'm excited. I'm here. I'm gonna get to them. So hang out.
Yeah, so you can get started on them. I'm gonna keep this poll open because I really want everybody to give us the feedback. This feedback really helps us. So just again, I'm gonna keep it open for about 30 more seconds and then we're gonna get to the questions.
Okay. I'll let you guys just have that open. I feel like I shouldn't look at it. It's like I'm being
Yeah, you can go into the Q&A.
I closed it. I'm not looking at it. So I'm just looking at the questions here. How do you practice ethics in this research? So obviously, when you're working with animal subjects, there is intense review by institutional boards to ensure that animals are not subjected to any undue procedures or pain that you could do in some other way. So lots of the animal research, you have to really minimize the use of animals and minimize the discomfort or pain those animals experience. So you're really trying to care for the animals as best you can with working with human subjects. There's, again, large amounts of protocol that need to be reviewed. And human subjects, it's you know, a matter of not being able to stick electrodes in their brains or to give them harmful drugs that are going to change how their brain works. So you just kind of go around those things. EEG is very non-invasive, so it's not painful or anything. So it's pretty easy to do those types of studies. How is it possible for some people to control what they do in dreams and what they dream about? I think it's called lucid dreaming. I'll speak on this phenomena a little more. So I do have a slide here. I think you can still see it. But asking how you can learn how to lucid dream. So you can learn how to lucid dream if you haven't done it, or if you want to get better at it. So first of all, first what you should do is get better sleep. So if you're not getting good sleep, forget about lucid dreaming. Get better sleep first. And once you get better sleep, practicing mindful awareness, so stopping, analyzing your sensory environment, asking yourself if you're sleeping during the day could potentially get you better at doing that when you're in a dream. So you want to practice mindful awareness. Some people suggest waking and going back to bed. So either setting an alarm for early in the morning when you're probably in REM sleep, waking yourself out of REM sleep so your frontal cortex might get going, and then trying to go back into REM sleep so that it's still kind of a little bit active. You want to be intentional about lucid dreaming. Be like, okay, I'm going to do this lucid dreaming thing. Even just telling yourself you're going to lucid dream can increase your chances. Keeping a dream journal is another suggestion I've seen. Maybe you want to cut around all of that. There are devices that can be placed on the surface of the scalp that can stimulate the brain with a little bit of electricity. Maybe you want to get a doctor to do this for you, or do it in a research study. But those, if you stimulate the frontal lobes, you can increase the likelihood you might have a lucid dream. That's what you're seeing on the right side of this figure here. So maybe we'll be better at this later in the future. Good question, though. Love talking about lucid dreaming. What animals turn into plants and eat their own brains? Side note, this is so awesome. Thank you so much. So it's these little creatures that are in the ocean. They're called sea squirts. I might actually have a picture of them somewhere. But they're little animals called sea squirts. There they are. Here's their plant mode, but they kind of swim around like little fish and then attach to rocks, and they eat their own brains. So these things don't have brains, but the little fish things did have a nervous system. Really cool there. Where did my chat go? Okay, there it is. Is there any lobe more delicate or important to protect than another? Not really. It depends on what you like doing. Different parts of the brain do different things. So not really. The frontal lobe, damage to the frontal lobe is really usually the least noticeable. People can damage large parts of that and not even recognize that it is in trouble. How did scientists determine the structure of the neuron? We invented microscopes, step one, and we invented a dye or a stain that stained neurons. Because otherwise, if you just labeled cells, you'd just see a big black mess. So we had to figure out a stain that would get into neurons, and we had to get a microscope that was good enough to see them. Don't many people live day after day on too little sleep? Yes. That is super unfortunate. So a sleep debt, you're running up that sleep debt as you're awake, but maybe you don't get enough sleep. Can you make it up later? Well, yes and no. In the short term, you'll make up sleep. But if you don't get enough sleep, just nights and nights in a row, that sleep is essentially gone and lost. So really important. Lots of people don't get enough sleep, and for a variety of different reasons there. Hope I answered your question. How do you practice sustainable and environmental research? I'm not so sure about that because I don't really practice research currently. So I'm not really sure about how to answer that question. If you have a kind of clarification there, put it in, and I'll get to it at the end. How does melatonin affect the sleep-on center? Awesome question. Why does melatonin work? Oh, it works. So for those of you who don't know, melatonin is a chemical that is released by a place in the brain. I think I have a picture of it. There it is. Called the pineal gland. And melatonin is released by that. It's released by that clock that I showed you in the brain. That clock was the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it doesn't release melatonin itself. It goes through this crazy pathway to do it. But melatonin is released when it's night, and it will tell your body that it's nighttime. So it works if the problem with you sleeping is not enough melatonin. Then melatonin works as a sleep aid. So usually it works in older individuals who are not as sensitive to their own body's melatonin, so they need a little more, or people who are jet lagged because their melatonin is not turning on at the right time because you went over to California and they're 3 hours behind us. So that's when melatonin does work as a sleep aid. It might not work as a sleep aid, so it's actually a little more controversial in younger people and people who probably have enough melatonin and are just basically ignoring their melatonin there. I actually don't know how we figured out how coffee works. It's probably a really interesting story behind it. I don't know. Why do we have nightmares? Well, that is a great question, Delilah. I talked about the limbic system a little bit when I mentioned REM sleep. The limbic system is active during REM sleep, and one of the parts of the limbic system is kind of like the fear control center, the amygdala. And so that part of the brain that's kind of like programmed with all the things you've learned to be afraid of gets to be more active at night. And if you're anxious, if you're feeling uncomfortable, it's more likely to intrude on your sort of dream space. Is my understanding why dreams typically will have those kinds of content. Some nightmares I've had actually because I was physically uncomfortable while sleeping. Like I remember one nightmare where like I lost an arm. I was sleeping kind of like this all night and was completely asleep. Great question here. Why do you forget your dreams? I assume that experiencing dreams and remembering things are mutually exclusive. So there's probably something about the hippocampus happening in REM sleep as well. And when the hippocampus is running basically on acetylcholine during REM sleep, it doesn't seem as capable of recording reality, which is what it's doing right now when you're awake. So it kind of records everything when you're awake and it plays those important things back to your cortex so you remember it later. So that's my explanation for that one. How am I doing? Okay, we're getting through. We've got lots of questions.
They're great questions, and I know everyone's appreciating the ability to have you answer them.
Awesome. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. This is fun. Chime in if you think of anything, Isabel, that I'm forgetting that we have on a slide here.
All right.
So next question is what does the brain go through when we go through nightmares, sleep paralysis, etc.? Again, I kind of mentioned this already with the amygdala, how you have these fear recognition centers that might become hyperactive, maybe because of some things happening outside of sleep. But these areas become active. They might become active in slow wave sleep for something called night terrors. Night terrors are different than nightmares. Nightmares are dreams that are negative. Night terrors are typically experienced by children, and essentially they don't know what's wrong. They are screaming in the middle of the night. Mom or dad will run into the room to try to console them. They'll just keep crying. They will not, calm down, and then they'll just go back to sleep, wake up the next day and not even know that happened. And they usually just kind of go away spontaneously. It's thought to be something with slow wave sleep, but there's a lot here we don't understand, and that's definitely one of them. Rachel asked a great question about why do some people suffer from insomnia? I think I have a slide there. I'm gonna kind of look for it for a second. So insomnia, we have to separate from different types of sleep disorders. There's my definition slide. So insomnia is the inability to obtain sleep of sufficient length or quality to produce refreshment the following morning. So it's not that you're busy doing other things and you just don't have enough time to sleep. That's sleep deprivation. People who have insomnia are trying to sleep, but it's not doing it for them. And maybe that's trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or both. So it's poor sleep quality, not sleep deprivation, and it's clinically defined by some characteristics here that I'm showing you. So lots of different reasons. There's primary insomnia, which means you have basically, it's a feature of your genes or your body, and we don't know why it happens. Or we have secondary insomnia, which is much more common. It means that people aren't getting good sleep for different reasons. Illnesses, chronic pain, anxiety or anxiety disorders and depression can be reasons people don't get good sleep. People who are depressed tend to sleep either too little or too much or too long. Medicines that delay or disrupt sleep, drugs, those things that I told you are bad for sleep can contribute to insomnia. Do you think that our dreams can predict the future or things that you don't know are going to happen? No, I do not. So I'll just be really direct. I don't think they do. I think that when by chance dreams do predict something that's going to happen, you notice it and you say, whoa, that's so cool. My dream predicted that. And then the rest of the 99.999% of the time, your dreams are just meaningless and don't have anything to do with anything. You don't say that there's anything happening, no correlation. So I think it's just our brains looking for things that kind of line up and trying to make sense of things. But dreams are cool nonetheless.
I am going to jump in just for a moment. We're going to keep answering questions, but I am going to ask that no more questions be entered into the Q&A.
Yeah. Oh my God, yeah.
They keep growing, and I know we want to answer questions, but we also cannot stay all night. So no more questions, and we'll answer the ones.
Speak for yourself, Lauren. I can obviously talk way too much. It's my job. But yeah, we'll close the questions there. You guys sent me a lot of great questions. I know Isabel and I really appreciate your engagement here. So take a second and say thank you right here. Really gracious to be here today. Thank you, Lauren, for inviting us. So I guess I'll just kind of keep on going here.
Yeah, keep going. See which ones, you
might have answered a few before.
Yeah.
Dreams when you faint. Not quite sure what you mean there. Dreams like you faint in the dream. I don't know. I'm not quite sure what you mean there. But I don't know. I've had a dream where I've been like a dream within a dream. Like I've woken up into a dream and not known that dream was a dream. So
you just put in the chat, meaning when you faint and dream.
When you faint and dream. I'm not
sure, but maybe are they referring to like I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but like you kind of like I'm dreaming and like I'm falling or something and I'll jolt myself awake or something like that. I'm not sure if that's what they're referring to, but
Oh, yeah, maybe that's what they're referring to. If that's what you're referring to, that's called it's called a hypnagogic jerk. What they used to call me in college. But a hypnagogic jerk is like when you start to fall asleep and you're like, oh, whoa, and you wake up like that. It's thought to be that your brain is like relaxing all of your muscles, but your muscles don't realize it's doing that. So like to your muscles, it seems like gravity is suddenly being lost because they don't like sense their own relaxation, is an explanation I've heard for that before. I'm not 100% on that. I'm like maybe 30% on that one. Olivia asked a question that I think I answered before. Why do we forget dreams? It's because of how the hippocampus is functioning when it's just running on acetylcholine during REM sleep. Essentially, it's just not equipped to do dreaming and to do remembering at the same time. Some dreams you can remember, especially if you think about them right after you wake up. Don't get up, don't even move. Think about the dream in your conscious state when your hippocampus is ready to do its thing, and you can remember your dreams. I got some dreams I can remember. I used to have like different buildings I was in during dreams that like don't exist in real life, but I like knew my way around in them as a kid. Why and how do people sleepwalk? That is such a cool question. Sleepwalking, I might have had a slide there. I don't think I had too much information on sleepwalking. So sleepwalking happens during slow wave stage sleep. So don't think of sleepwalking as people having dreams and acting out dreams, because that's not what's happening. Usually it happens with like the deepest sleep in the middle of the night. People will wake up, but they're not like, it's not like they're in a dream and they're like awake but imprisoned in their body. They're very out of it, even when they're sleepwalking. And people who are sleepwalking have actually had violent behaviors when people have interrupted their sleepwalking. And there's actually a handful of instances where a person has been acquitted of murder committed while sleepwalking. I don't know why it happens. I think there's probably some better explanations out there. But the best thing to do if somebody is sleepwalking is just to take them quietly by the hand and just lead them back to bed. Usually sleepwalking is something certain people experience and certain people just never have an episode with it, typically more common in children. How come I can remember my dream when I wake up in the morning? Was I in REM before you woke up? Often when you remember your dream, it's when you're like allowed to come very gently out of REM. So it's not like when your alarm clock goes off, because that'll just like jolt you and you'll forget your dream right away. So it's those nice mornings when you're really relaxed and you can go back when you would wake up and take another sleep. That is a good way to remember your dreams. What happens when you sleepwalk, we talked about this before, does not happen in REM. So it's something else. I don't have a ready explanation for that. Such a good question though. I'll look more into it. Maybe we'll do one next year on sleepwalking. Is there a way to make yourself dream about something that you want to dream about? Yes. Think about it a lot before you go to sleep. Like as you're going to sleep, think about that thing. It's called dream incubation, and that can increase the possibility that you will dream about it. If you wake up from a dream, think about that dream and what you want to do in that dream and go back to sleep. And sometimes you can have a lucid dream. I used to have lots of lucid dreams, but I don't have any more. Why? I don't know. I don't know enough about you to really venture a guess. It could have to do with maybe the quality of your sleep, different changes to your schedule, but we really just aren't sure. If you want to have more lucid dreams, practice using your frontal lobe. Practice taking control of your life, planning things out, strengthen your frontal lobe, your planning, your self-will, and maybe it will come back. How can something remind you of a dream you recently had? For example, if you had a dream about an animal and then later after you wake up, see a picture of that animal, remember your dream. We know memory kind of works this way. It works so that you can have a tough time recalling things, but then you can recall them if you get a cue. So maybe that cue or that picture of the animal activates enough neurons that were activated during the dream to get you enough to recollect it. I'm not sure, but that's what I would guess. Would you get better at video games? Something we all want to do. I played lots of video games as a kid. I always used to dream about video games. Would you get better at video games if you get a good sleep or if you get a bad sleep related to non-declarative memory? So you want a good sleep, you want to have lots of REM sleep to get better at those video games or anything else, any other skill, motor skill that you're practicing. Sleep is important. Olympic athletes know it. They always get really good sleep in their training regimens. Okay, we're getting near the end. What if you need light to go to sleep? So everybody is different and you want to go to sleep in the way that makes you most comfortable. If you need some light there, if you like having a clock or something and you feel the most relaxed during that, do it. But less light, less noise, more peaceful environment generally helps your sleep quality. Is it true that women's and men's circadian rhythms differ so that women are more likely to get up earlier than men? I am not sure. Have you heard anything about this, Isabel?
I've not, no.
I can make brash generalizations about either gender, but I'm not going to because it's usually wrong.
It's probably smart.
Right? I'm not sure. I know that some people are just like genetically, they call them morning doves or night owls. So it's almost like a personality feature, whether you generally like getting up in the morning or if you hate getting up in the morning. And people generally won't change that throughout their lives. I'm not sure how it varies. Why are some dreams so much easier to remember than others? Some dreams so much easier to remember than others. Well, kind of maybe think about two reasons. So first, that dream had something that was very meaningful for you in wakefulness. So that same thing was there when you woke up, and that continuum between dream and wakefulness was just made in your cortex, and it was easy to remember. For that reason, maybe because of its significance, or maybe because you woke up very peacefully from that dream, even if it seemed weird and like it didn't matter. But, you know, I will point out that there's a whole neurochemical system I showed you for dreaming. And those different neurochemicals, you know, things you eat could influence their concentration. So drugs or medications you're taking, those can all play into. It's not just your behavior. So there's other factors in there as well that could be influencing those things. How long is too long to sleep? Once you wake up and you say, I'm rested, staying in bed longer is too long. So it obviously varies for individuals, but if you're kind of sleeping out of lack of other things you want to do, or you know, staying in bed for maybe other reasons in your life, that ends up being too long for sleep. And people who have health conditions, often if those health conditions improve, that'll improve as well. All right, last three questions. Thank you guys so much for hanging in there and listening to my answers. third question here, how come some people can wake up from sleep and go back to sleep, and some people cannot go back to sleep once awake? Again, this kind of is getting to our individual differences in our brain chemistry. So some people probably who are morning doves tend to like jolt right out of sleep. I am a morning dove. When I wake up, I'm like, boom, out of bed, no alarm clock needed, go, hit the ground running at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But when it gets to be nighttime, I am hurting. I am no good to anybody after about 7 p.m. So that's my personal chemistry, and I can't go back to sleep once I'm awake. I know some people can. So if you can go back to sleep once awake and you feel like you're sleepy when you woke up, then just go back to sleep. How does stress affect your dreams? Usually when you're stressing about something, when you're quiet, you're starting to go to sleep, you'll think about it. If you haven't tried, you'll think about it, I promise. So you sort of will start doing the dream incubation, but with that stressful topic. And then you're more likely to have stress dreams or dreams that include that stressful topic. So stress doesn't tend to affect things and help them, and it doesn't help dreams really either. Okay, last question here. What happens to the brain when we travel and go to sleep at different times? So when you go to sleep or try to go to sleep at different times, your melatonin is not doing the same thing as your sleep load. So I showed you that slide with that activating clock signal. Yeah, got it here. We've been looking at the scary sleepwalking person. Anyway, so that activating signal, well, it's way back in the presentation, but the activating signal is basically not on at the right time. It's like turning on 3 hours too late because you're in California. So your brain is not getting the melatonin signal when you're jet lag and you wish you could be asleep, but it's only 9 p.m. in your body's clock. When it's 9 p.m. and you can't sleep because you're jet lagged, that's when you should take melatonin, because the melatonin will reprogram your suprachiasmatic nucleus of your hypothalamus or your sleep on center and say, hey, sleep on center, you need to get to it. So when you travel, that's when melatonin can help you get to sleep most effectively, at least in these studies. Okay, great.
Wow. That was amazing. You guys, we need to somehow, through the silence in the chat, let's applaud. That was just a phenomenal amount of information. And thank you for answering. That was 31 questions.
Oh my gosh.
And it would have been more had I not said we're cutting it off.
This is my experience when I teach this. Everybody is so interested about sleep. I think.
Well, and I'm going to send an email because we did lose a lot of people, but at yesterday's session, Lisa had brought up there is a neuroscience course being offered. The registration's still open, so I'm going to get that information. I'll send that out to people because clearly, there's a lot of interest here, and if any of you might be interested in that course, I'll get that information out, and you can look at it and see if maybe that's something you want to do over the summer and learn more about neuroscience. So Izzy and Nathan, thank you so much. This was amazing. I'm going to take you up on your offer to do another cafe in the fall because there's so many good topics. But all of you, thank you so much for joining us. Remember to check out our Summer of Science listing. So next week there's no cafe, but then we start up again on Wednesday, June 24th at the new time. So thank you all for coming today.
Thank you everybody in the chat.
Thank you.
Yes.
Really appreciate all your nice comments here. Thank you so much.
All right.
Awesome.